Hi, welcome. I'm Faith. I'm your librarian moderator from Woodson, the Regional Library. And on behalf of the Chicago Public Library, welcome to Speak on It, a conversation connecting teens with successful authors. And today we have Veronica Roth, best-selling author of Divergent. Yay! So just a little information about Veronica. She was born in New York, but raised in Barrington, Illinois. She graduated from Northwestern University in 2010. Did you major in creative writing or did you just take a course?
I majored in it, yeah.
Okay. She majored in creative writing. Of course, she's written Divergent, which is a whole entire series that got turned into a movie. Yeah. And then she also wrote Carve the Mark, and The Face Divide, which is a duology, which followed the Divergent series. And then her most recent book, The Chosen Ones, published in April of this year, is her first novel for adults. How exciting. Just curious, what made you switch over really quickly?
I think it was just the idea for the book. It just felt like it was for a different audience about a different period of life. So I was like, well, might as well follow that creative drive. So that's pretty much why.
Okay, awesome. So a lot of your biographies say that you started writing at 11. Who or what was your inspiration?
I always think about my mom when I'm asked this. She's not a writer, but she outlawed boredom in our house. She would not let us complain. Like, you couldn't complain about being bored. She had so much to do. And she had this kit, this book making kit. So you'd like fill out the book and then send it to a place for it to be bound, whatever. And I didn't finish the kit, but I think it gave me the idea like, oh, I could write. And I loved reading. So I think that was where it started, because it's a little bit of an odd thing to just suddenly start doing one day, feels like, if no one introduces you to it. But that's kind of, I think, where the idea to start writing came from. I always loved playing pretend when I was younger. And so I think I kind of missed it at that age.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's awesome. So you started writing Divergent when you were in your senior year of college, correct?
Yes.
So one of our viewers are asking, how long did it take for you to get that book published after you finished writing it?
Oh boy. It was kind of a whirlwind. So I had gotten the idea for it my freshman year of college and then put it away because there was no time. And I wasn't ready to write yet. And then senior year, I figured out a way to make it work. And I wrote it really quickly because it was a much shorter draft than the one that is now on shelves. And then I did a lot of revising on it. So that part is hard to remember how long that took. But once it was done and ready to submit, I had an agent and she was like, okay, I think we're ready to go. And after that, I think she sent it on a Thursday and we got responses by a Monday. It was just it was the time. Everyone was kind of looking for dystopian stories specifically. So, and I was like, funny enough, I have one of those. So the timing was really excellent and a big part of it.
Oh, awesome. You know what? Speaking of timing, when you were doing a CBS interview, you mentioned that success is not always about talent. And you talked about how some of your other creative writing colleagues from college were excellent writers, and then you contributed your success to timing. Do you still believe that, or?
Yeah, I think I remember that interview. I think the point I was trying to make is that people kind of feel like the better you do, that must mean the better you are at your job. Mm-hmm. And that's just not fair to a lot of the writers that I know. I have so many friends who are writers who have not had the level of success I've had. It doesn't mean that they haven't worked as hard, and it doesn't mean that they're not as talented. So I think that was kind of the point I was trying to make. Timing is very important, and having the right thing at the right time is important. And, talent and hard work are a huge part of it too. So it's a little it's a cluster of factors. But the temptation when you have great success is to try and I think psychologically, people want to find some secret thing they did that made it happen. And that's just not the reality for me. I think there's a lot of other stuff going on that you can't control when something like Divergent happens. So I just think it's important to acknowledge that. Yeah.
Okay. We have another question from a viewer. They said, I'm rereading Chosen Ones. Oh, cool.
Oh, nice.
Right now. And did you intentionally recreate scenes from your previous works, like highlighting upon your writing journey, Sloane escaping from 2 Floors High, and Max and Sloane's first meeting?
I don't know what that's referring to. I think what this person might be experiencing is that I'm the same person writing these books. And yeah, I mean, I was thinking pretty consciously about, because Sloane is basically like a YA hero, but like aged 10 years, and in a little bit of arrested development. So it kind of made sense to me to think about the YA heroines I have written about and read while I was writing it. So if there are echoes of previous books, that's probably why, but it's certainly not intentional. Yeah.
Well, I feel like writers usually stay in their niche, so it's understandable.
Yeah.
Speaking of niche, a lot of your work is based in like dystopian and like science stuff. How did you choose to write about those things? Like how did you choose your niche of writing?
Wow, I think it's not so intentional. I think you end up writing what you love to read. And I always loved science fiction growing up, even more than fantasy. I mean, I read both, I still read both, but I loved just, I think I like the questions that it asks. Because fantasy asks different questions, I think, most of the time. It's hard to generalize. But science fiction wants to know about the kind of impacts of what we're doing now, and to kind of have ideas for the future and dreams for the future, sometimes nightmares for the future. And that kind of focus on what's coming, and the psychological impact of like what we're dealing with now, I find that really interesting. And I think science fiction kind of facilitates those questions, even while it's just like, space adventure, which is what, Carve the Mark is. It's just like not based in science at all. It's more like fantasy. But I do still love the way that technology intercedes in people's lives, and what it can facilitate, and then the problems that it causes and stuff like that. So.
Thank you. Did you do a lot of research for all of your books, or was there one book that you feel like you didn't have to do so much research?
I've done research for all of them, yeah. I do love to research, but they have required more research as time has gone on. So for Divergent, I would say I did the least, which sometimes readers will come and point out to me. Because I learned on the Divergent movie set, for example, that even the best knife throwers in the world can only hit the target 7 out of 10 times. So the accuracy with which people throw knives in Divergent is completely absurd, which isn't something that I knew, and I probably should have tried to find out. But then for Chosen Ones, which is set in Chicago, also like Divergent, I just feel like the Chicago that's in Chosen Ones feels more like Chicago than the Chicago that's in Divergent. And that's because I'm older now and I know a little bit more about the way the world works. And I also knew what kind of questions to ask, I think. It's just experience over time, learning to research. But whenever I find myself with a lack of inspiration, I go to the things that interest me in the real world. So, I read a lot of science articles, and I just go in weird Wikipedia page loops endlessly. And I find that kind of replenishes my creative well pretty well.
Okay. And a reader asked, which faction would you be?
Ooh, good question. I feel that this question, I get asked this a lot, but it doesn't mean that I'm tired of it. What it means is that my sense of self is continuing to shift over time, and it's harder and harder to answer. I think the faction I would end up choosing, because I have a kind of moral rigidity, is abnegation. And it's not because I'm good at that. It's because I'd be this is probably the right thing to do, which is a very abnegation way of thinking about it. So I think that's what I would pick, but I definitely grew up in a candor house. Everybody tells you what they think in my family, sometimes to our detriment.
Well, yeah.
Did you pick a faction, Faith?
Right?
Yeah.
To hold up the truth for you sometimes. And so thinking about that, you mentioned in another interview that writing Divergent kind of changed you as a human being or as a person. Do you feel like that's true for all of your books? Like, do you think that is like a normal process for a writer?
Oh man. Well, I don't know what's normal for other writers. I can only speak to my own experience, but usually what I discover is that I write books for a lot of reasons most of the time, just because I'm like, this is a good idea, I think. But a lot of it, what I find myself doing is working on something by writing about it. Whatever is interesting me about this particular character or their emotional journey, it'll end up being something that's relevant to my life later. So I don't know what that is for Chosen Ones. I'm sure I'll figure it out in 1 to 3 months. But Divergent was a significant one for me because Triss is basically, she's not struggling with anxiety or fear particularly. She's actually very capable in that way, but she's going through essentially like an exaggerated version of exposure therapy, which is something that I later did after writing this series, or I think while writing Allegiant, I went back to therapy. I've been a couple times in my life, and I did exposure therapy for anxiety because I was having really consistent panic attacks, like often in the middle of the night, and it was really interfering with my well-being and my life. And so it's almost like writing the books prepared me to do it. It was like a way of psyching myself up for it, or of acknowledging that it would be hard, but maybe worthwhile. I think that was a huge and significant thing about writing that series that makes me enduringly fond of it. It's just like, well, good. It really helped me ultimately.
Well, speaking of anxiety, we at the library have been doing a lot of programs for teens around stress relief and just kind of dealing with the times, right? Because we know that the pandemic itself can cause a lot of different things, having to take mental health days and things like that. If you had any advice for young adults in terms of self-care or managing anxiety, what would you tell them?
So the type of therapy that I did, exposure therapy, is not really something you can do on your own. But I did another kind of therapy, which you can do on your own, which is called mindfulness, which is basically like meditation, right? Which sounds like some kind of crunchy, kind of woo-woo thing to do. But I'm not that kind of person. I'm a very practical person and very no nonsense about these things. But there is room for that personality in mindfulness too, is what I learned. So basically it's learning how to breathe, take some time and breathe, and teach your mind to be present instead of always dwelling on the past or always in the future, because that's what contributes a lot to anxiety. And especially during this pandemic, I don't know about you, but I just am constantly trying to anticipate, and you know what? It's not working because none of us know what's going to happen next. And that's really hard. And so doing these exercises, it can be 5 minutes every couple days. And there's all kinds of apps and videos and free resources online that you can find to learn how to do it and do these guided meditations. So that's one practical thing that everyone can do in this time.
In this time, right? This time of uncertainty. That's my favorite word right now. So I got another reader question. They want to know if you've ever experimented with writing other genres besides science fiction.
Wow, that's a great question. And yes, I tried a couple times to write contemporary, and I would just stall out because I'd be like, wait, what happens in people's lives again? Do they go to prom? It's the only thing I could remember is that sometimes high schoolers go to prom. I don't know. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I just it didn't suit me at all, I think. But one day maybe, I never rule it out. I feel like there's so much room to grow inside of what I'm doing. It's hard to think of the necessity of doing something else until that like the well runs dry. I'm still working on being a good sci-fi writer. So
okay. So we were talking about these times, right? So there's a quote from Insurgent, right? I really want to talk to you about this quote. The quote is, "Cruelty does not make a person dishonest, the same way bravery does not make a person kind." I feel like that's a little bit relevant, especially to the political climate that's going on right now. Is any of your work ever like inspired by current events or personal experiences?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm sure. So oftentimes I don't really know that's what it's about until later. Although in Chosen Ones, mysteriously, the Dark One, which is like the Dark Lord figure, lives in Trump Tower.
Oh.
Interesting, don't you think?
Yeah.
That was not at all subtle. Anyway. But yeah, I think I feel like what ends up happening with books, particularly science fiction books, is that it seems like the writer was really brilliant and came up with and pulled all these like hidden references to the world. But actually, we notice these things in books because they're relevant. So it's like I put 1,000 things in that book, you know, some of which seem relevant to like what was going on at the time, and some of it didn't. And we kind of like notice the things that are. But I do like that quote because it's just I don't know. Just because someone's nice to you doesn't mean they're being honest with you, I think was like the flip side of that quote, which is always a good thing to keep in mind, I guess.
Yeah. I really appreciated that quote. I was like, oh, so profound.
Oh, thank you.
It was kind of like the signature Divergent quote where you say, "Fear doesn't shut you down, it wakes you up." Like, oh my goodness. Like, how did you, like, was that like a natural occurrence? Like, did they just kind of come out as you were writing, or like?
Well, no, I think it's almost like the solution to a mystery, because I was trying to write Tris and Four's dynamic, and I knew I didn't want them to be like ooey gooey sweet to each other, because that's not a dynamic that interests me particularly, like maybe in real life, but not, you know, on the page. And so he was being kind of mean to her. He's not really mean to her, but he's hard on her, you know, and I was kind of trying to figure out why, because I knew that they were acting this way, but I didn't really understand why. And then he sort of like explains it to her, and when he explains it to her, it's like me explaining it to myself. And writing is full of all those like moments of revelation where you don't know where a thought comes from. Obviously, you are in charge of it. You're the one writing it down, but it like brings things out of the depths of you and shows you to yourself. So this is why I encourage all young people to write, even if you are not so good at it, because you might discover things.
Yeah, a lot of self-reflection occurs. So in a couple of your interviews, you mentioned that you love books and that you prefer a quiet life. Right?
Indeed.
I was curious. Like, I always want to know this. Like, what does your writing space look like? Like, can you like describe it to me?
Yeah, I wish I could take this webcam off and show you this entire room. So I'm not at home right now. I like quarantine, traveled across the country to spend some time with family, but I at home have my office in a sunroom, so I'm like surrounded by plants and windows looking out on the street, and my desk is back to back with my husband's with a window between us. So we work like five feet away from each other, but we're facing opposite directions. And it works really well for us because we are, I don't know, we're gross and we like to be close together. And what else about it? It's clean. I've got bookshelves all above the windows all around the room. I'm not sure what else. Yeah, I always have water.
Always have water.
Yeah. I don't know.
No, I feel that. I always have to have a cup of coffee near me when I'm working, like, intently. So we have another viewer question. Thank you for sharing that with me, by the way. Are there any updates on the Chosen One adaptation?
There aren't any updates. Everything's kind of weird right now. People are just trying to figure out how to make things work. Some things are working, some things are not. But it's ongoing. I get updates regularly. So
Is it being turned into a TV show or a movie?
Yeah. So, that's the hope. I sold the rights to it to Picture Start, which is a company that is sort of like a hybrid producer studio model. It's hard to explain. But my contact there was Eric Feig, who worked at Summit and then Lionsgate when they adapted Divergent, and he was the first person to read Divergent and express an interest in it. So we go way back, and now he works for this company, or he started this company. So it feels like the gang's back together again, the original one. So that's kind of cool.
That is really cool. So you get like two book to movie adaptations.
We'll see.
You'll see.
Yeah, I mean, it always takes like a perfect storm of 1,000 people to make something work. So always hoping that storm happens. But for a while, it's a lot of like hurry up and wait, just like, all right, we'll see what happens. So.
Well, when you wrote Divergent, were you expecting it to take off the way it did? Like, were you expecting that level of success? No?
No. I mean, that would be like the height of delusion, There's just... You can't, I thought it would do pretty well, probably. I had confidence, I thought it was good and that the timing was right for it, and that I had worked really hard on it. But like I said, there's a lot of stuff that's out of your hands and that you can't control. So you got to focus on what you can control.
Okay. So you mentioned that you did a lot of reading when you were younger. Who was your favorite author when you were a kid?
Ooh, oh man. So it's hard to pick a favorite. I loved Garth Nix, who's, still writing. And the first time I met him as an adult, because we now have an editor in common, I lost my mind. But anyway, yeah, I loved his Sabriel, the Aporson sort of trilogy. I forget. Oh, the Old Kingdoms trilogy is what it's called. And then I love Judy Blume. And I read the Animorphs books. K.A. Applegate. Yeah. And Madeleine L'Engle and Lois Lowry. And yeah, I mean, I read a lot.
Yeah. You're taking me back to my childhood. So we got another reader question. Ooh, I like this question. If you could be a character in any one of your books, who would you be and why?
Well, I think I'd avoid Divergent, actually, because that's kind of a fraught world to live in. That's a lot of action. But Carve the Mark is like, I kind of stuffed everything that I like into that universe, like these weird planets that the galaxy feels strangely small. It's almost like they're countries instead of planets. And there's so much to explore there and so many interesting things to see and people to meet and languages to learn. And it's very much like kind of like a rich fantasy universe instead of a sci-fi universe, although there are planets and spaceships, but that's pretty much where it stops. The science stops. Anyway, so I think I don't know if I'd be any of the characters there either. Maybe a side character. Like someone not involved in the, revolution that's happening in those books. But yeah, maybe I'd be like Tekka. That's the character who's really good at, everyone has like a special ability in that universe because I love that sort of thing. And she can like talk to machines with her hands. So I might be her. She's cool.
Okay, awesome. I know in one of your interviews you mentioned that you were obsessed with it was an X-Men character. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Like as a kid?
Yeah, as a kid. You were obsessed with
Storm. Yeah.
Storm, yes. You were obsessed with Storm. So like one of the viewers is asking like, who is your favorite villain?
My favorite villain? Oh man. I think the enduring power of Darth Vader has like lingered in my life.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think because we did get his origin story, not I love those movies. The prequel movies are not the best, but I like that we meet him when he's like this terrifying figure. And when I saw the Star Wars movies as a kid, like he was really scary to me. And part of it is like the mask, because you're just like, well, what is behind it, and not knowing is like more terrifying than when you actually see it. But anyway, and then we get to like go back and figure out why he is the way he is. And, I don't think that his painful history is an excuse for the way that he murders people or anything like that. But I do find it interesting anytime that we get to know more about a villain's trajectory and, where they started, and kind of just the fascination with like how people become that way, I think has always kind of caught my attention.
Okay. Well, who's your favorite villain in your book?
Oh, in my books. Mm-hmm. Oh, I like the dark one. Yeah, in Chosen Ones. I think I got to explore that character more than I have. Like, I have this weird problem where I keep structuring stories such that we don't encounter the antagonist very often, which means that you don't get to know them. And so I really liked that opportunity to build him up. I mean, he's like a Dark Lord figure, so he has a lot of like the standard kind of like Dark Lord stuff, which was very intentional. He's supposed to remind you of like 1,000 different people that you've read about, but then, but there's a little twist to him that makes him different. So you'll have to read to find out, everyone.
Yeah, I agree with you that villains are way more interesting when you have a backstory, because you kind of almost empathize. You have these mixed feelings that are like between empathizing with them and like being angry with them at the same time.
Yes. Yeah. And some people go too far, and they're kind of like excuse all the bad stuff just because there's some sad backstory. And I'm not for that, because it's like at the end of the day, like Kylo Ren committed genocide. So like, let's not forget. Like, just as an example. I think people are like, ooh, Adam Driver's cute, therefore his character must be good. No.
Okay. Well, we got 3 minutes left, so I have to ask you questions that we ask our other authors. One, what book are you most proud of and why? And then 2, for young aspiring authors in today's climate, what words of wisdom or advice would you offer them?
Okay, let's take those one at a time. Wow. Okay. Well, I think the book I'll always be most proud of, for obvious reasons, is Divergent, because that was the first book that I finished. And because I had such a drive to finish it at such a young age, the older I get, the more I'm like, wow, that was pretty special. So I'll always feel really proud of it. And then, of course, like, it's the most recent one, because I feel like I am working, I know how to work harder now on the things that matter. And so I'm pretty proud of Chosen Ones also, for that reason. It has the most rigorous world building of any of the books I've written, which is partly thanks to my editor, and he's so good at that. So he helped prompt me to think about things in a more rich and deep way. So those are my 2 babies right now, I guess. My first baby and my most recent baby. What was your second question?
What advice would you give a young aspiring author in today's climate?
Oh, in today's climate, oh my God. Well, mostly I just want to soothe all of the young people as much as possible. So I feel like right now, even though maybe you're at home a lot, you can't see your friends as much, you feel like, oh, I should be writing all the time. Like, just take that pressure off, man. This is a really hard time to do anything. I'm getting paid to write, and I'm still having a hard time with it. So I think letting it be fun and enjoyable is really important. That's the way that it's going to carry you through the rest of your life, because writing is something that has a lot of ups and downs. Even if you're really successful, you still get reviewed, you still deal with setbacks, and so if you can't enjoy the writing part of it, it's going to be really hard for you to deal with those setbacks. But if you love it, then, and you create space for yourself to enjoy it and to play around with it and to take risks and to do weird things and to like channel your id and do all the weird stuff that you like, then, it's just like, why do it? So basically my advice is like, please try to enjoy it. And don't put too much pressure on yourself to like figure it all out right now.
That's excellent advice. Thank you, Veronica. We're at time, but next week, Wednesday, we will have an interview with Jenny Lee, author of Anna Kay and other middle grade novels. Same time, right here at 4 p.m. And we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you. Join us next week. Thanks, Veronica.
Thanks.
Bye.